The pain seized Elena's body with such ferocity that she nearly fell from her horse. And in that moment of blinding agony on the endless prairie, she realized with terrible clarity that her baby was coming now, whether she was ready or not. She had left Fort Bridger 3 days ago, desperate to reach her sister in Salt Lake City before the birth. But the journey had proven far more treacherous than she had anticipated. The wagon train she had planned to join never materialized, the guide having taken ill with fever, and Elena had made the foolish decision to press on alone. Her husband had died 6 months earlier in a mining accident near South Pass, and she had no one else in Wyoming territory. Her sister Margaret was all the family she had left in this world, and Salt Lake City had seemed like salvation, a place where she could start over with her child. Now, as another contraction gripped her in its merciless hold, Elena knew she had made a catastrophic mistake. The sun was setting over the vast expanse of grass and sage, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Her mare, a gentle creature named Rosie, had carried her faithfully for 3 days, but even the horse seemed to sense something was terribly wrong. Elena's water had broken an hour ago, soaking through her dress and the saddle beneath her, and the contractions were coming faster now, each one more intense than the last. With trembling hands, Elena guided Rosie toward a small grove of cottonwood trees near a creek she could hear babbling in the distance. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body, and she bit down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying out. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to endure hardship without complaint, but this was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The pain was primal, overwhelming, a force of nature as unstoppable as the wind that swept across the prairie. She managed to dismount, though her legs nearly buckled beneath her when her feet touched the ground. Rosie whinnied softly, and Elena stroked the horse's neck with a shaking hand. "Good girl," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Good girl, Rosie." The grove offered some shelter from the wind, and Elena spread out the blanket she had been using as a bedroll beneath the largest cottonwood. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage the simple task. She had helped deliver a calf once, back in Pennsylvania before she had married Thomas and moved west, but that knowledge seemed pitifully inadequate now. She was alone on the open prairie with no midwife, no doctor, no help of any kind, and her baby was coming whether she was prepared or not. Elena sank down onto the blanket as another contraction seized her. This one was so powerful that she could not hold back a scream, and the sound echoed across the empty landscape, swallowed up by the vastness of the prairie. Tears streamed down her face as she fumbled with her dress, pulling it up over her swollen belly. She had no scissors to cut the cord, no clean cloths prepared, nothing but the few supplies in her saddlebag and her own desperate determination to survive. The labor went on for hours. The sun set completely, and the stars emerged in their thousands, brilliant and cold in the September sky. Elena lost all sense of time, lost everything except the overwhelming need to push, to bring her child into the world. She braced herself against the trunk of the cottonwood tree, her fingers digging into the rough bark, and pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed. When the baby finally came, sliding into her waiting hands in a rush of blood and fluid, Elena sobbed with relief and terror in equal measure. The infant was so small, so perfect, and for one horrible moment he did not make a sound. Elena's heart stopped, and she rubbed the baby's back frantically, her tears falling onto his tiny body. Then he cried, a thin, reedy wail that was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. She pulled him to her chest, wrapping him in her shawl with trembling hands. "Oh, thank God," she whispered. "Thank God, thank God." She managed to tie off the umbilical cord with a strip of fabric torn from her petticoat, then cut it with her husband's old pocket knife, the only blade she had. Her hands were covered in blood, and she was shaking from exhaustion and shock. But her son was alive, breathing against her chest, and that was all that mattered. Elena cleaned the baby as best she could with water from her canteen, then wrapped him more securely in the shawl. He had stopped crying and was making small, snuffling sounds, his tiny fists waving in the air. She had never seen anything more miraculous. Despite the circumstances, despite the pain and fear and loneliness, she felt a surge of fierce love for this tiny person she had brought into the world. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Elena realized how dire her situation truly was. She was bleeding heavily, far more than seemed normal, and she felt dizzy and weak. The night air was growing cold, and she had no fire, no shelter beyond the trees. She tried to stand, thinking she should tend to Rosie, should try to make some kind of camp, but her legs would not support her weight. She sank back down onto the blood-soaked blanket, clutching her son to her chest. "I am sorry," she whispered to the baby. "I am so sorry, little one. I should have waited. I should have been smarter." The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Elena felt fresh tears slide down her cheeks. She had survived the birth, but she did not know if she would survive the night. The bleeding was not stopping, and she was growing colder, weaker with each passing moment. She pulled the baby closer, trying to keep him warm with her own body heat, and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, her grip on the baby never loosening even as her strength faded. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had planned together before the mine collapse had stolen him from her. She thought of her sister Margaret, waiting in Salt Lake City, not knowing that Elena might never arrive. She thought of all the things she wanted to tell her son, all the love she wanted to give him, and wondered if she would live long enough to see him grow. When the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the eastern horizon, Elena was barely conscious. She lay on her side beneath the cottonwood tree, her arms wrapped around her baby, her blood pooling on the blanket beneath her. The infant was still breathing, still alive, and that gave her a small measure of comfort. Even if she died here on the prairie, at least she had brought him into the world. At least he had lived, even if only for a few hours. She did not hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She did not hear the man's sharp intake of breath when he saw her lying there. She only became aware of another presence when a shadow fell across her face, blocking out the growing light of dawn. "Madam," the voice was deep, urgent, tinged with concern. "Madam, can you hear me?" Elena's eyes fluttered open, and she saw a man kneeling beside her, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He was young, perhaps in his middle 20s, with a strong jaw and dark eyes that widened when he saw the baby in her arms. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed. He pulled off his hat, revealing dark brown hair that fell across his forehead, and looked from Elena to the baby and back again. "Madam, what happened? Where is your husband, your family?" Elena tried to speak, but her throat was so dry that only a whisper emerged. "Alone," she managed. "Just us." The man's expression shifted from shock to grim determination. He shed his coat and spread it over her, then gently touched the baby's head with one calloused finger. "The baby is alive," he said, and Elena heard wonder in his voice. "You did this alone?" She nodded weakly, and the man shook his head in disbelief. "You are bleeding badly," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I need to help you. My name is Benjamin Fletcher. I am a rancher from near Fort Bridger. I was tracking a lost horse and saw your mare by the creek. Can you tell me your name?" "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Edwards, my son." "Your son is beautiful, Elena," Benjamin said, and there was such kindness in his voice that Elena felt tears welling up again. "But we need to get you help, or he is going to lose his mother. Do you understand?" Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she was fine, but she knew it would be a lie. She could feel her life slipping away with each drop of blood that soaked into the earth beneath her. She nodded, and Benjamin's jaw tightened. "All right," he said. "I am going to do what I can to stop the bleeding, and then I am going to get you to Fort Bridger. There is a doctor there and a midwife. They will know what to do." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "This is going to hurt, Elena. I am sorry." Elena barely registered the pain as Benjamin worked. Her whole body was already one vast ache, and what he was doing seemed distant, almost unreal. She focused on her son, on the tiny weight of him in her arms, on the small movements of his chest as he breathed. Benjamin was talking to her, his voice low and steady, telling her about his ranch, about the horses he raised, about anything and everything to keep her conscious and alert. "I have a place about 5 miles south of Fort Bridger," he was saying as he worked. "Been running it for 3 years now, since my father passed. It is not much, but it is mine. Got about 50 head of horses, couple dozen cattle. Do you like horses, Elena?" She managed a small nod, and Benjamin continued, his hands quick and efficient as he tore strips from his own shirt to fashion makeshift bandages. "I thought so. Anyone who rides out onto the prairie alone has to have some courage. Foolish courage, maybe, but courage nonetheless." "Where were you heading?" "Salt Lake City," Elena whispered. "My sister." Benjamin's hand stilled for a moment. "That is a long ride from Fort Bridger," he said quietly. "Especially for a woman alone, especially for a woman about to give birth." "I know," Elena said, and a sob caught in her throat. "I know it was foolish, but I had nowhere else to go." Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something shift in his expression, something she could not quite name. "You are not alone now," he said finally. "I am going to get you through this, Elena. You and your son both. I promise you that." He fashioned a travois from branches and his bedroll, working with a speed and efficiency that spoke of long experience in solving problems in the wilderness. Elena watched him through half-closed eyes, marveling at the way he moved, the quiet competence in every gesture. When he was satisfied with his work, he gently lifted the baby from her arms. "Just for a moment," he said softly. "I need to get you onto the travois." Elena wanted to protest, wanted to keep her son close, but she did not have the strength. She let Benjamin take the baby, watched as he cradled the tiny infant with surprising gentleness. Then strong arms were lifting her, and she was being settled onto the makeshift stretcher, and Benjamin was tucking his coat around her again. "Here," he said, placing the baby back in her arms. "Hold him close. Keep him warm." Elena clutched her son to her chest, and Benjamin tied them both securely to the travois. "It is going to be a rough ride," he warned, "but it is the only way. Fort Bridger is about 8 miles north. We should make it by mid-morning if we push hard." He secured the travois to his horse, a big bay gelding that stood calmly despite the unusual burden, then retrieved Elena's mare from where she had wandered near the creek. With both horses in tow, Benjamin set off across the prairie at a steady pace, neither too fast nor too slow, his attention constantly shifting between the trail ahead and the woman on the travois behind him. The journey was a blur of pain and movement for Elena. She held her son close, her arms locked around him even as consciousness began to slip away again. She was dimly aware of Benjamin talking to her, urging her to stay awake, to keep fighting. His voice became her anchor, the only thing tethering her to the world. "Tell me about your husband," Benjamin said at one point. "What was his name?" "Thomas," Elena whispered. "Thomas Edwards. He died 6 months ago, mining accident. She heard Benjamin curse softly under his breath. I am sorry, he said, and she could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. That is a hard thing to lose a husband. My mother died when I was 15. Fever took her. My father never really recovered from it. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. Elena wanted to say something comforting, but she could not find the words. The pain was growing worse, and she felt consciousness slipping away despite her best efforts to hold on. Benjamin must have sensed it, because his voice grew more urgent. Stay with me, Elena, he said sharply. Do not give up. Your son needs you. What are you going to name him? The question cut through the fog in Elena's mind. She looked down at the baby in her arms, at his perfect tiny face, and felt a fierce surge of determination. Samuel, she said, her voice stronger than it had been. After my father, Samuel Edwards. Samuel is a good name, Benjamin said. A strong name. Samuel Edwards is lucky to have a mother as brave as you, Elena. Elena did not feel brave. She felt terrified and weak and so very tired. But she held on, focusing on Benjamin's voice, on the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, on the weight of her son in her arms. She had brought Samuel into the world alone on the open prairie, and she would not abandon him now. When the walls of Fort Bridger finally came into view, Elena was barely conscious. She heard Benjamin shouting, heard the sound of running feet and urgent voices. Then she was being lifted, carried, and someone was taking Samuel from her arms. She tried to protest, tried to hold on, but she did not have the strength. The baby, she gasped. Please, the baby. We have him, madam, a woman's voice said, kind and reassuring. We have your boy. You just rest now. Elena's last conscious thought was of Benjamin's dark eyes looking down at her, filled with a concern that seemed to go beyond that of a stranger who had stumbled upon someone in need. Then the darkness rose up and claimed her, and she knew nothing more. When Elena woke, it was to the sound of a baby crying. Her eyes flew open and she tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed her back down against the pillows. Easy now, a woman's voice said. You have lost a lot of blood, Mrs. Edwards. You need to rest. Elena turned her head and saw a middle-aged woman with kind gray eyes and silver-streaked brown hair sitting beside her bed. Beyond the woman, in a wooden cradle near the fireplace, Samuel was crying lustily, his tiny fists waving in the air. My baby, Elena said, her voice hoarse. Is he all right? He is perfect, the woman said, smiling. Healthy and strong despite everything. You did well, Mrs. Edwards. Better than well, considering you delivered him alone on the prairie. I am Martha Collins, the midwife here at Fort Bridger. Martha helped Elena sit up, propping her against the pillows, then retrieved Samuel from the cradle and placed him in Elena's arms. The baby stopped crying immediately, nuzzling against her chest, and Elena felt tears of relief sliding down her cheeks. How long have I been unconscious? She asked. 2 days, Martha said. You had a bad hemorrhage, Mrs. Edwards. If Mr. Fletcher had not found you when he did, I do not think you would have survived. As it is, you are very weak. It will be some time before you are strong enough to travel. 2 days. Elena looked down at Samuel, marveling that he had survived that long without her. How did he eat? She asked anxiously. I was not conscious to feed him. Mr. Fletcher found a woman in the fort who had recently given birth, Martha explained. She agreed to wet nurse your boy until you were strong enough, and I have been giving him sugar water to supplement. He has done very well, considering. Elena felt a rush of gratitude that left her momentarily speechless. I need to thank her, she said finally, and Mr. Fletcher. I owe him my life, both our lives. Martha's expression grew thoughtful. Mr. Fletcher has been here every day, she said. Twice a day, actually, morning and evening, to check on you and the baby. He is very concerned about you both. Elena felt a strange warmth in her chest at those words, though she told herself it was simply gratitude. "He is very kind," she said softly. "I was so frightened when I realized what was happening. I thought I was going to die out there on the prairie, and Samuel with me." "You are a very brave woman, Mrs. Edwards," Martha said firmly. "And very foolish, if you do not mind me saying so. What possessed you to try to make that journey alone in your condition?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down at Samuel to hide them. "I had nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "My husband died 6 months ago, and I have no family in Wyoming except a sister in Salt Lake City. I thought I could make it before the baby came. I thought I had more time." Martha's expression softened. "Well, you are safe now," she said gently. "And when you are strong enough, we will help you get to Salt Lake City. But that will not be for several weeks at least. You need to rest and recover your strength." Over the next few days, Elena's world narrowed to the small room where she lay recovering, the steady rhythm of feeding and caring for Samuel, and the visits from Benjamin Fletcher. He came every morning and evening, just as Martha had said, bringing small gifts each time. Fresh milk from one of the fort's cows, a soft rabbit fur blanket for Samuel, a book of poetry he thought Elena might enjoy during her convalescence. At first, Elena was simply grateful, touched by the kindness of a stranger. But as the days passed and she grew stronger, she began to look forward to Benjamin's visits with an eagerness that had nothing to do with gratitude. He would sit in the chair beside her bed, his hat in his hands, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he was breeding, about his dreams of building something lasting in this wild country. She told him about her life in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas and falling in love, about the bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow that had marked her pregnancy. Benjamin was easy to talk to, with a quiet humor that often made Elena laugh despite everything she had been through. He was 26, he told her, just 2 years older than she was, and he had been running his ranch alone since his father's death 3 years earlier. He had no other family, no siblings or cousins, just himself and the land and the horses he loved. "You ever get lonely?" Elena asked him one evening as the sun was setting outside her window. Samuel was asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful and content. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Yes," he said finally, "I do. The land is beautiful and I love the work, but there are times when the silence feels overwhelming. I think about my parents, about the family they wanted me to have, and I wonder if I am doing right by their memory, living out there alone." Elena looked down at Samuel, her heart aching. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "I thought having the baby would make the loneliness easier, but sometimes it makes it worse. Thomas should be here to see his son. He should be here to hold him and love him and watch him grow." Benjamin leaned forward in his chair, his expression intense. "Thomas should be here," he agreed quietly. "But he is not, and that is not your fault, Elena. You are doing the best you can in an impossible situation. You are surviving. You are taking care of your son. That takes courage." Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Some days I do not feel very courageous," she admitted. "Some days I just feel tired and scared and alone." "You are not alone," Benjamin said, and there was something in his voice that made Elena's breath catch. "Not anymore." Their eyes met and held, and Elena felt a fluttering sensation in her chest that had nothing to do with weakness or blood loss. She told herself it was too soon, that she was still grieving for Thomas, that she barely knew this man who had saved her life. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. The moment stretched between them, charged with an awareness that neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge aloud. Then Samuel stirred in Elena's arms, making a soft mewling sound, and the spell was broken. Benjamin cleared his throat and stood, reaching for his hat. "I should go," he said. "You need your rest." "Thank you for coming," Elena said, and she meant it more than he could possibly know. "Your visits mean a great deal to me, Benjamin." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "They mean a great deal to me too, Elena," he said quietly. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Elena sat in the gathering darkness, holding her sleeping son, and wondered what was happening to her. She had loved Thomas with all her heart, had grieved for him with a depth of sorrow she had not known was possible. How could she be developing feelings for another man so soon? Was she being disloyal to Thomas's memory? Or was she simply a lonely widow seeking comfort wherever she could find it? She did not have answers to those questions. All she knew was that when Benjamin walked into her room each day, the world seemed a little brighter, a little less overwhelming. And when he left, she found herself counting the hours until he would return. As September gave way to October and Elena continued to recover, Martha began allowing her to take short walks around the fort. Benjamin accompanied her on these excursions, carrying Samuel so that Elena could focus on regaining her strength. They would walk slowly around the perimeter of the fort, Elena leaning on Benjamin's arm, talking about their hopes and dreams and fears. "Tell me more about your sister," Benjamin said one afternoon as they paused to rest on a bench near the fort's main gate. "The one in Salt Lake City." Elena smiled, thinking of Margaret. "She is 3 years older than I am," she said, "and much more sensible. She married a farmer named John Prescott 5 years ago, and they moved to Salt Lake City to start fresh. They have 2 children now, a boy and a girl. Margaret has been writing to me for months, begging me to come live with them, especially after Thomas died." "That sounds like a good situation," Benjamin said carefully. "A stable home for you and Samuel." Elena nodded, but she felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving Fort Bridger. "It is what I planned," she said, "what I have been working toward, but I confess, the closer I get to being well enough to travel, the less eager I feel about it." Benjamin shifted Samuel in his arms, his expression unreadable. "Why is that?" he asked quietly. Elena looked at him, at the strong lines of his face, at the gentle way he held her son, and felt her heart twist. "I think you know why," she said softly. The words hung in the air between them, and Elena saw something flare in Benjamin's eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. But before he could respond, Samuel began to fuss, and the moment was lost. They walked back to Elena's room in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, as Elena lay in bed with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside her, she allowed herself to truly examine her feelings. She was developing very real, very powerful feelings for Benjamin Fletcher. She looked forward to his visits with an intensity that went far beyond gratitude. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what he was doing, whether he was thinking of her too. When he looked at her with those dark, serious eyes, she felt a flutter of awareness that was unmistakably attraction. But was it right to feel this way? Thomas had only been dead for 6 months. Was she dishonoring his memory by allowing herself to care for someone else? Or was it simply human nature to seek connection, to reach for life and love even in the midst of grief and loss? Elena did not know. All she knew was that the thought of leaving Fort Bridger, of traveling to Salt Lake City, and never seeing Benjamin again, filled her with a sadness that went bone deep. The next morning, Benjamin arrived earlier than usual. Elena was feeding Samuel when he knocked on the door, and Martha showed him in with a knowing look that made Elena's cheeks flush. "Good morning," Benjamin said, his hat in his hands as always. He looked nervous, Elena realized, his fingers worrying at the brim of his hat in a way she had never seen before. "Good morning," Elena replied, settling Samuel against her shoulder to burp him. "Is everything all right?" Benjamin took a deep breath, then sat down in his usual chair. "I have been thinking," he said, his words coming out in a rush, "about you and Samuel, about your plans to go to Salt Lake City." Elena's heart began to beat faster. "Yes," she said carefully. "I know it is too soon," Benjamin said, his dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I know you are still grieving your husband, and I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. But I cannot let you go without saying this, Elena. I care about you. I care about you and Samuel both, more than I have ever cared about anyone in my life." Elena felt tears welling up and she blinked them back, not wanting to miss a single moment of this. "Benjamin," she whispered, but he pressed on. "I have a ranch," he said. "It is not much, but it is solid and growing. I can provide for you and Samuel. I can give you both a home, a place to belong. And I promise you, Elena, I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you will give me the chance." He stood up then, crossing to where she sat with Samuel, and dropped to one knee beside her chair. "Marry me, Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay here with me. Let me be a father to Samuel, and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." Elena's tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks unchecked. "It is so soon," she said, echoing his own words. "Thomas has only been gone 6 months. What will people say?" "I do not care what people say," Benjamin said fiercely. "I care about you. I care about that beautiful boy in your arms. I know I am not his father, and I would never try to replace Thomas in his life. But I can love him as my own, Elena. I already do." Elena looked down at Samuel, then back at Benjamin, and felt something shift in her chest. She had loved Thomas, would always love him in a way. But Thomas was gone, and she was still here, still alive, still needing love and companionship and partnership. And Benjamin was offering her all of that, offering it with a sincerity and devotion that shone from every line of his face. "I care about you too," she said, her voice shaking. "More than I thought possible. When you walk into this room, the whole world seems brighter, and when you leave, I count the minutes until you come back. But I am frightened, Benjamin. I am frightened of being hurt again, of losing someone else I love." Benjamin reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "I cannot promise you that nothing will ever hurt you again," he said softly. "This is a hard land, and life is uncertain. But I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to keep you and Samuel safe. I can promise you that I will love you with everything I have, for as long as I live." "Is that enough?" Elena looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words reflected there. She thought about the alternatives, about going to Salt Lake City and living with her sister, always wondering what might have been. She thought about the loneliness she had felt in the months since Thomas's death, and the way that loneliness had eased in Benjamin's presence. And she thought about Samuel, about giving him a father who would love and protect him. "Yes," she said, the word barely more than a whisper. "Yes, Benjamin, I will marry you." The joy that blazed across Benjamin's face was like nothing Elena had ever seen. He stood up and gently took Samuel from her arms, laying the baby carefully in his cradle. Then he pulled Elena to her feet and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you, Elena. I promise you will not regret this." Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the fort's chapel. Martha stood up with Elena, and a rancher friend of Benjamin's named Jack Morrison served as his witness. Elena wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her alter to fit her still recovering body, and she carried a small bouquet of late-blooming prairie flowers that Benjamin had picked for her that morning. Samuel slept peacefully in Martha's arms throughout the ceremony, waking only when the chaplain pronounced Benjamin and Elena husband and wife. Benjamin kissed Elena gently, reverently, and when they drew apart, Elena saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Hello, Mrs. Fletcher," he said softly, and Elena felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it left her breathless. "Hello, husband," she replied, and they both laughed, giddy with joy and relief and the sweet promise of a future together. They spent that night at the fort, in the same room where Elena had been recovering, but the next morning, Benjamin loaded their belongings into his wagon and they set out for his ranch. It was a beautiful October day, crisp and clear, with the aspens turning gold on the distant mountains. Elena sat beside Benjamin on the wagon seat. Samuel bundled warmly in her arms and felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The ranch, when they arrived in the late afternoon, was more beautiful than Elena had imagined. It sat in a sheltered valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by rolling hills covered in grass and sage. The house was small but well built, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney and real glass windows. There was a barn, a corral with several horses watching their arrival with interest, and a chicken coop from which Elena could hear the soft clucking of hens. "It is not much," Benjamin said, a hint of nervousness in his voice, "but it is home." "It is perfect," Elena said, and meant it. She could already imagine their life here, could picture Samuel toddling around the yard, chasing chickens and laughing. Could picture herself and Benjamin sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. Benjamin helped her down from the wagon, then retrieved Samuel from her arms so she could navigate the steps up to the porch. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a bedroom that Benjamin had clearly been using, and a smaller room that had been set up as a nursery. "I have been working on it," Benjamin said, almost shyly, as he showed Elena the nursery. There was a crib that looked handmade, a rocking chair near the window, and a small chest for storing baby clothes. "I thought Samuel should have his own room." Elena felt tears prickling at her eyes again. "It is wonderful," she said softly. "You did all this in 3 weeks." "I wanted everything to be ready for you both," Benjamin said. He laid Samuel in the crib, tucking the rabbit fur blanket around him, then turned to Elena. "I want you to be happy here, Elena. I want this to feel like home." Elena crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "It already does," she said. "You have given me more than I ever dreamed I would have again, Benjamin. A home, a family, a future. I do not have the words to tell you what that means to me." Benjamin pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it was not gentle and reverent but deep and full of longing. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressed against his. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you, Elena," Benjamin said, his voice rough. "I have loved you from the moment I found you on that prairie, holding Samuel at dawn. I know it is fast, I know it is probably foolish, but I cannot help it. You have my heart completely." "I love you too," Elena said, the words coming easily, naturally. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but you have shown me that the heart has room for more than one love. Thomas will always be a part of me, will always be Samuel's father, but you are my future, Benjamin. You and the life we are going to build together." That night, as they lay together in Benjamin's bed with Samuel sleeping peacefully in the next room, Elena felt a contentment she had not known in months. She traced lazy patterns on Benjamin's chest, marveling at the strange turns her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a happily married woman, excited about becoming a mother. 4 months ago, she had been a grieving widow, terrified and alone. And now she was here, in the arms of a man who loved her, starting a new chapter of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked, his voice drowsy. "About how unexpected life is," Elena said softly. "About how sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. If I had not decided to make that foolish journey to Salt Lake City, if I had not gone into labor on the prairie, I never would have met you." Benjamin tightened his arms around her. "I was tracking a horse that had broken through a fence," he said. "If that horse had not escaped, if I had not gone looking for it that particular morning, I would not have found you. It feels like fate, does not it?" "It does," Elena agreed. "Like we were meant to find each other." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when Elena woke to Samuel's cries a few hours later, Benjamin woke with her. He lit a lamp while she fed the baby, and they talked quietly in the golden pool of light, sharing their dreams for the future. They would expand the ranch, Benjamin said. Maybe get some more cattle, breed better horses, and they would have more children if Elena was willing, brothers and sisters for Samuel. "I would like that," Elena said, looking down at Samuel's perfect face as he nursed. "I always wanted a big family. Thomas and I talked about having 4 or 5 children." "Then we will have 4 or 5 children," Benjamin said, smiling. "Or however many you want. This house will be full of love and laughter." The months that followed were some of the happiest of Elena's life. She threw herself into making the ranch feel like home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting a small garden that she would tend come spring, learning to care for the chickens and help Benjamin with the horses. Samuel thrived in the clean mountain air, growing stronger and more alert every day. And her relationship with Benjamin deepened, evolving from the passionate rush of new love into something richer and more enduring. Benjamin was a devoted husband and a wonderful father to Samuel. He would come in from working the ranch each evening and immediately reach for the baby, cooing over him and playing with him until Elena had to laugh at the sight of this big, strong rancher reduced to making silly faces to earn Samuel's gummy smiles. He was patient and gentle with Elena too, never pushing her beyond what she was ready for, always making sure she felt cherished and valued. By Christmas, Elena was pregnant again. She told Benjamin on Christmas morning, after they had exchanged small gifts, and Samuel had delighted in playing with the wooden rattle Benjamin had carved for him. "I am expecting another baby," she said, watching Benjamin's face carefully for his reaction. "Due sometime in July, I think." Benjamin's whoop of joy startled Samuel into crying, and Elena laughed as her husband swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. "We are having a baby," he said, his face alight with happiness. "A baby of our own." "Benjamin," Elena said gently, touching his face. "Samuel is yours too. You are the only father he has ever known." "I know," Benjamin said, his expression growing serious. "And I love him as my own, Elena. I hope you know that. But this baby, this is the child we made together. That feels miraculous." Elena understood what he meant. She loved Samuel with a fierce, protective love that would never diminish, but she was excited about this new baby too, about creating a child with the man she loved. It felt like a fresh start, a new beginning for all of them. The winter passed in a blur of cold days and warm nights. Elena's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she bloomed under Benjamin's attentive care. He hired a woman from Fort Bridger to come help with the heavy work around the ranch, insisting that Elena needed to rest and take care of herself. Samuel began to sit up on his own, then to crawl, and the house rang with his babbling and laughter. In March, Elena received a letter from her sister Margaret. It was the first correspondence she had received since marrying Benjamin, and she opened it with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Dearest Elena," the letter began, "I have received your letter explaining that you married and are no longer coming to Salt Lake City. I confess I was shocked at first, but after reading your words, I can only say that I am happy for you. You deserve joy, dear sister, and if this Benjamin Fletcher can give you that, then I am grateful to him. I hope you will bring your husband and son to visit us someday. John and the children are eager to meet the newest members of our family. Your loving sister, Margaret." Elena read the letter to Benjamin that evening and saw relief flash across his face. "I was worried she would disapprove," he admitted. "That she would think I was taking advantage of you in your grief." "Margaret is practical," Elena said. "She understands that life does not always follow the rules we think it should, and she can see that I am happy. That is all that matters to her." As spring gave way to summer, Elena's belly grew round with the new baby. This pregnancy was easier than her pregnancy with Samuel had been, perhaps because she was not carrying the weight of grief and loneliness. She felt healthy and strong, and when the baby kicked, she would guide Benjamin's hand to her belly so he could feel it too. The look of wonder on his face never failed to move her. In late July, Elena went into labor on a bright, hot afternoon. This time, she was not alone on the prairie but safe in her own bed, with Martha Collins there to help and Benjamin pacing anxiously in the next room. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when their daughter was born just after midnight, Elena wept with joy and relief. "A girl," Martha said, placing the baby in Elena's arms. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Benjamin was allowed in moments later, and he approached the bed with an expression of awe on his face. "She is perfect," he breathed, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "She is absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Elena asked, looking up at her husband with tired but happy eyes. Benjamin was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between Elena and their daughter. "Grace," he said finally. "Grace, because she is a gift we did not expect. Grace Fletcher." Elena smiled. "Grace Fletcher," she repeated. "It is perfect." Watching Benjamin with Grace in those first days, seeing the tenderness with which he cradled his daughter, Elena felt her heart overflow with love. He was equally devoted to Samuel, who was now nearly a year old and toddling around the house with increasing confidence. Benjamin had no favorites, showed no preference between the boy who was his by love and the girl who was his by blood. They were both his children, and he loved them both with a fierce, protective devotion that sometimes brought tears to Elena's eyes. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered under Benjamin's careful management, and they were able to expand their herd and improve their stock. In the summer of 1876, Elena gave birth to twin boys, whom they named Thomas after her first husband and James after Benjamin's father. Samuel, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his new brothers, and Grace, just a year old, regarded them with solemn curiosity. "4 children," Benjamin said one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "4 beautiful children." "We are blessed, Elena." "We are," Elena agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy, Benjamin. After Thomas died, I thought my life was over, but you showed me that it was just beginning." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a family," he said softly. "A purpose beyond just working the land. You gave me everything I ever wanted." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The horses nickering softly in the corral, the chickens roosting in their coop, the distant howl of a coyote on the hills. Inside the house, the children were all sleeping, watched over by the hired girl they had brought on to help with the growing family. You ever think about that morning? Elena asked suddenly. When you found Samuel and me on the prairie, all the time, Benjamin said. I was so frightened when I saw you lying there, covered in blood. I thought you were dead at first. Then I saw the baby move, and I realized you were still breathing, and I made a promise to myself that I would save you both, that I would not let you die out there alone. You kept that promise, Elena said. You saved us, Benjamin, in every way a person can be saved. They were quiet again, and Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain and fear and loneliness she had endured, the desperate night alone on the prairie, the miraculous dawn when Benjamin had found them. All of it had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this beautiful life they had built together. I want to tell Samuel about Thomas someday, Elena said. When he is old enough to understand, I want him to know that his birth father was a good man who would have loved him very much. We will tell him together, Benjamin said firmly. Thomas deserves to be remembered, and Samuel deserves to know where he came from. Elena felt tears prickling at her eyes, moved by Benjamin's generosity of spirit. You are a good man, Benjamin Fletcher, she said. The best man I have ever known. I love you, Elena, Benjamin said, turning to look at her in the fading light. I will love you until the day I die. And I love you, Elena replied. Always. As the years passed, the Fletcher family continued to grow and flourish. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses and showed a natural talent for training them. Grace was bright and mischievous, always getting into some kind of adventure. The twins, Thomas and James, were inseparable, a whirlwind of energy that kept Elena and Benjamin constantly on their toes. In 1878, Elena gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Martha after the midwife who had helped save Elena's life. And in 1880, their youngest child was born, a boy they called Andrew. 6 children in all, the house bursting at the seams with love and noise and chaos. Benjamin expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, adding on 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch was thriving, known throughout the territory for the quality of its horses. They had hired several ranch hands to help with the work, and Elena had become known as an excellent cook and a generous neighbor, always ready to help a family in need. On Samuel's 10th birthday, Elena and Benjamin sat him down for a serious talk. The other children were outside playing, their shrieks of laughter drifting in through the open windows. But Samuel was in the parlor with his parents, looking between them with curious eyes. Samuel, Elena began, her voice gentle, there is something your father and I need to tell you, something important about where you came from. She told him the story then, leaving nothing out. She told him about Thomas Edwards, the man who had been her first husband, who had died in a mining accident before Samuel was born. She told him about the desperate journey toward Salt Lake City, about going into labor alone on the prairie, about the terrifying hours before dawn when she had thought they would both die. And she told him about Benjamin finding them, about the choice she had made to stay and build a life with this kind, honorable man. Samuel listened intently, his young face serious. When Elena finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. So Benjamin is not my real father, he asked finally, and Elena's heart clenched at the question. Benjamin is your real father in every way that matters, Elena said firmly. He has raised you since you were hours old. He has loved you and cared for you and been there for every important moment of your life. But yes, Thomas Edwards was the man who gave you life. Samuel looked at Benjamin, his eyes searching. Do you love me differently than you love Grace and the others? He asked, his voice small. Because I am not really yours. Benjamin pulled Samuel into his arms, holding him tight. "Listen to me, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are mine. You have been mine since the moment I found you and your mother on that prairie. I chose you, Samuel. I chose to love you and raise you as my own. That does not make you any less my son. You understand?" Samuel nodded against Benjamin's chest, and Elena saw tears on her son's cheeks. "I understand," he said. "And I am glad you found us, Pa. I am glad you chose us." "So am I," Benjamin said. "So am I, son." That conversation marked a turning point for Samuel. He seemed to grow up a little that day, to understand that family was not just about blood but about choice and love and commitment. He asked questions about Thomas sometimes, wanting to know what he had been like, what he had looked like, and Elena answered honestly, keeping Thomas's memory alive for the son he had never known. But it was Benjamin that Samuel called Pa. Benjamin he turned to for advice and guidance. Benjamin he tried to emulate. And watching them together, Elena felt grateful beyond measure for the man who had given her son a father's love. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Samuel, true to his early promise, became an expert horseman and helped Benjamin expand the breeding program. Grace, to everyone's surprise, showed a talent for numbers and helped keep the ranch's books. The twins were still inseparable, always working together, thinking together, getting into trouble together. Martha was quiet and thoughtful, happiest with a book in her hands. And Andrew, the baby, was everyone's favorite, spoiled and adored by his older siblings. Elena and Benjamin's love for each other only deepened with time. They had weathered challenges together, including a harsh winter in 1882 that killed several head of cattle, and a bout of scarlet fever that swept through the family in 1884, leaving all the children weak but, mercifully, alive. Through it all, they had relied on each other, their partnership the foundation on which their family was built. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin surprised Elena with a trip to Salt Lake City to visit her sister. It was the first time Elena had been away from the ranch in years, and she was nervous about traveling with all 6 children, ranging in age from Andrew, who was 4, to Samuel, who was 14. But the visit was wonderful. Margaret and her family welcomed them with open arms, and Elena was able to show Benjamin and the children the city she had been so desperate to reach all those years ago. As she walked the streets with her husband and children, Elena marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she had planned. If she had made it to Salt Lake City that September, she would have been dependent on her sister's charity, raising Samuel alone, always wondering what might have been. Instead, she had Benjamin and the ranch and 5 more beautiful children. She had a life full of purpose and meaning and love. The desperate, frightened woman who had delivered her baby alone on the prairie seemed like someone from a distant past, almost unrecognizable. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked one evening as they walked along the streets of Salt Lake City, the children having gone to bed at Margaret's house. "About how lucky I am," Elena said, squeezing his hand. "About how that terrible night on the prairie led to the most wonderful life I could have imagined." "I am the lucky one," Benjamin said. "Finding you and Samuel that morning, it changed everything for me. It gave me a reason to wake up each day beyond just working the ranch. It gave me love." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out overhead. "Do you think Samuel is happy?" Elena asked. "Knowing about Thomas, I mean. I worry sometimes that he feels confused about his identity." "Samuel is happy," Benjamin said confidently. "He knows he is loved, Elena, by both of us, by his siblings, by everyone on the ranch. And he knows that having 2 fathers, one who gave him life and one who raised him, does not diminish either of them. It just makes him richer." Elena nodded, reassured. "You are right," she said. "I just want him to feel secure, to know that he belongs." "He belongs with us," Benjamin said firmly. "Always." They returned to the ranch a week later, all of them happy to be home. The children scattered to their favorite spots. Samuel heading immediately to the horses, Grace to her room with a new book Margaret had given her, the twins to explore the barn to see if anything had changed in their absence. Martha and Andrew stayed close to Elena, helping her unpack and telling her about everything they had seen in Salt Lake City. That night, as Elena and Benjamin lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, Elena felt a profound sense of contentment. This was home. This was where she belonged. Not in Salt Lake City with her sister, not in Pennsylvania where she had been born, but here, in this log house in Wyoming territory, with the man she loved and the children they had created together. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Samuel, at 18, took over much of the day-to-day running of the horse breeding program, showing a skill and intuition that made Benjamin burst with pride. Grace, at 17, surprised everyone by announcing that she wanted to become a teacher, and Elena and Benjamin arranged for her to attend a teaching college in Cheyenne. The twins, at 16, were inseparable as ever, both of them talented riders who helped with the cattle drives. Martha, at 14, was still the quiet one, but she had begun helping Elena with the garden and the chickens, showing a talent for nurturing growing things. And Andrew, at 12, was showing signs of becoming as good a horseman as his older brother Samuel. In 1889, Wyoming became a state, and the Fletcher family celebrated with the rest of the territory. Benjamin had become a respected member of the community, serving on the local school board and helping to settle disputes between ranchers. Elena was known for her kindness and generosity, always ready with a meal for a hungry traveler or help for a family in need. On a warm September evening in 1890, 15 years after that fateful dawn when Benjamin had found Elena and Samuel on the prairie, the whole family gathered for Samuel's 21st birthday. He was a man now, tall and strong, with Elena's green eyes and a quiet competence that reminded everyone of Benjamin. He had been courting a young woman from Fort Bridger, a pretty girl named Alice, and there were whispers that an engagement might be imminent. As Elena watched her oldest son laugh with his siblings, saw the way Benjamin's arm rested easily around his shoulders, she felt tears pricking at her eyes. This was the baby she had brought into the world alone, the tiny infant she had clutched to her chest as she bled out on the prairie, not knowing if either of them would survive the night. And now he was a man, strong and happy and loved, with a bright future ahead of him. "He has turned out well," Benjamin said softly, coming to stand beside her. "You should be proud, Elena." "We should be proud," Elena corrected, leaning against her husband. "You raised him, Benjamin. You made him the man he is." "We did it together," Benjamin said, kissing the top of her head. "Everything we have, we built together." Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the children had all gone to bed, Elena and Benjamin sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The September air was cool and crisp, smelling of sage and grass and the promise of autumn. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that had watched over Elena on that terrible, wonderful night 15 years ago. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to Salt Lake City, marrying me instead of living with your sister?" Elena turned to look at him, surprised by the question. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Benjamin. A home, a family, a love I thought I would never have again. How could I regret that?" I just want you to be happy, Benjamin said, taking her hand. I want you to have the life you deserve. I have the life I deserve, Elena said, squeezing his hand. I have you and our children and this beautiful place we have built together. I am happy, Benjamin, happier than I ever thought possible. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the pain and fear and desperate hope that had marked that long-ago night. She thought about Thomas and the love they had shared and the son he had given her. And she thought about Benjamin, about the dawn when he had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. I love you, she said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. I will always love you. And I love you, Benjamin replied. From that first moment on the prairie until my last breath, you are my heart, Elena Fletcher. As the moon climbed higher in the sky and the night grew deeper, Elena and Benjamin remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they shared. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, safe and cherished. The horses nickered softly in the corral, the chickens roosted in their coop, and the creek burbled its eternal song. This was home. This was family. This was love. And it had all begun on a desperate dawn, when a cowboy had found a woman holding her newborn son on the open prairie, and had chosen to save them both. Everything that had come after, all the joy and love and life, had flowed from that single moment of grace. Elena would never forget that morning, would never stop being grateful for the man who had found her at her most vulnerable and had offered her not just rescue but a future. Benjamin Fletcher had given her back her life, and she had spent every day since trying to show him what that meant, to love him with the same fierce devotion he had shown her. As they finally rose to go inside, Benjamin paused and turned back to look at the prairie stretching out beyond the ranch, silvered in moonlight. Do you know what I think about sometimes? He said quietly. I think about how easily I could have missed you that morning. If I had gone a different direction looking for that horse, if I had delayed leaving by even an hour, I would never have found you, and my whole life would have been different. But you did find us, Elena said, wrapping her arms around his waist. You found us and you saved us and you loved us. That is what matters. That is what matters, Benjamin agreed, holding her close. You and our children are everything to me, Elena, everything. They went inside together, checking on each of the children before retiring to their own room. Samuel was sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the side, his face peaceful in sleep. Grace was curled up with a book that had fallen from her hands. The twins were in their usual position, facing each other as if even in sleep they could not bear to be apart. Martha was neat and tidy, her blankets pulled up to her chin. And Andrew was tangled in his sheets, his hair sticking up in all directions. They are beautiful, Elena whispered, standing in the doorway of Andrew's room with Benjamin behind her. They are, Benjamin agreed. Every single one of them. We made something good here, Elena, something that will last. And it did last. The Fletcher family continued to grow and thrive, their ranch becoming one of the most respected in the state. Samuel married his Alice and gave Elena and Benjamin their first grandchildren. Grace became a beloved teacher in Fort Bridger, eventually marrying a young lawyer and settling nearby. The twins took over more and more of the ranch operations as Benjamin grew older, working together as seamlessly as they always had. Martha married a neighboring rancher and proved to be as talented at raising crops as her mother had predicted. And Andrew, the baby, eventually took over the family ranch, carrying on the legacy that Benjamin and Elena had built. Through it all, Elena and Benjamin remained the heart of the family, their love for each other an example to their children and grandchildren. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. But their love never diminished, never wavered. It remained as strong and true as it had been on that October day in 1875, when they had spoken their vows in the little chapel at Fort Bridger. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house that Benjamin had expanded over the years, their laughter and chatter a joyful noise that made Elena's heart swell with happiness. Samuel, now in his 40s with children of his own, stood up to make a toast. "To my mother and father," he said, raising his glass. "My mother, who was brave enough to bring me into this world alone on the prairie, and my father, who was kind enough to find us and make us his own. Everything I am, everything we all are, comes from the love you two share. Thank you for showing us what it means to build a life together, to weather storms and celebrate joys, to love each other through everything." To Elena and Benjamin Fletcher, the room erupted in cheers and applause, and Elena felt tears streaming down her face. Benjamin pulled her close, his own eyes bright with emotion. "Can you believe it has been 40 years?" he whispered in her ear. "It feels like just yesterday I found you on that prairie." 40 years, Elena repeated, marveling. "And I would do it all again, every single moment, to end up right here with you." They danced that night, swaying slowly to music played by one of their grandchildren on a fiddle, surrounded by the family they had created. And as Elena rested her head on Benjamin's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, she thought about the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She had lost one love in Thomas, had known grief and despair and desperate loneliness. But she had found another love in Benjamin, a love that had healed her broken heart and given her a reason to hope again. She had brought one child into the world alone on a cold September night, and had gone on to raise 5 more with the man she loved. She had built a home, a family, a legacy that would endure long after she was gone, and it had all begun at dawn, with a cowboy finding a woman holding her newborn son on the open prairie. Elena and Benjamin lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, though by then they were both in their 70s and slowing down. The ranch was in good hands with Andrew and the twins managing the day-to-day operations, and Elena and Benjamin spent their days in the rocking chairs on the porch, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played. Samuel, now in his 50s, visited often, bringing Alice and their grandchildren. He had become a respected horse breeder in his own right, and the Fletcher name was known throughout the West for quality stock. He still called Benjamin Pa, and the bond between them had never weakened, despite Samuel knowing the truth of his parentage. One warm July afternoon, as Elena and Benjamin sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold, Samuel joined them with a question he had been pondering. "Pa," he said, settling into a chair beside them. "Ma, I have been thinking about writing down our family history so the great-grandchildren will know where they came from. Would you tell me again about that morning, about how you found us?" Benjamin and Elena exchanged a look, and Elena saw the love that still burned bright in her husband's eyes after all these years. "I was tracking a horse," Benjamin began, his voice taking on the cadence of a story told many times before. "A mare that had broken through the fence. I had been riding since before dawn, and I was about ready to give up and head home when I heard your mother's mare nickering near a creek. I was so weak," Elena added softly. "I had lost so much blood, and I thought we were going to die there. But then I heard footsteps, and I looked up, and there was your father like an angel sent from heaven." "You were holding Samuel," Benjamin said, his eyes distant with memory. "Wrapped in your shawl, covered in blood, barely breathing." and I knew in that moment that my life had just changed forever. I had found the family I had been searching for without even knowing I was searching. "Did you love Ma right away?" Samuel asked, his voice curious. "Or did that come later?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think I loved her from that first moment," he said finally. "But I did not know it yet. I just knew that I could not leave her there, that I had to save her and the baby no matter what it took. The love I felt later, the kind of love that builds a marriage and a family, that came as I got to know her. But the seed of it was there from the beginning." Elena reached over and took Benjamin's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Of dying, of leaving Samuel alone, of everything. And then there was Benjamin, strong and capable and determined to save us. He gave me hope when I had none left." "And you gave me purpose," Benjamin said, turning to look at his wife. "You and Samuel both. You gave me a reason to be more than just a rancher working alone on the prairie. You made me a husband and a father, and those have been the greatest gifts of my life." Samuel listened to his parents' words, seeing the love that still flowed between them after 5 decades, and felt profoundly grateful. He was a product of tragedy and grace, of loss and love, and he would not change a single moment of his history. As the years advanced and Elena and Benjamin grew older, they remained devoted to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. Wyoming was no longer a wild territory but an established state, the frontier days fading into memory. But the Fletcher Ranch endured, a testament to the hard work and love of the couple who had built it. Benjamin passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1927, just shy of his 78th birthday. Elena woke to find him gone, his hand still clasped in hers, a slight smile on his weathered face. She did not cry at first, simply sat holding his hand as the winter sun rose outside their window, remembering all the dawns they had shared together. "Thank you," she whispered to his still form. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life I could have imagined." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the impact Benjamin Fletcher had made in his 77 years. But it was Elena's words at the service that people remembered, the simple truth she spoke through her tears. "Benjamin found me on a September morning in 1875, she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I was alone and frightened, having just given birth to my son on the open prairie. I thought I was going to die. But Benjamin saved me, and then he gave me a reason to live. He loved me when I did not think I could be loved again. He raised my son as his own and gave me 5 more beautiful children. He built a home and a legacy that will endure long after we are both gone. And he showed me, every single day for 51 years, what it means to truly love someone. I will miss him for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we spent together." Elena lived for 3 more years after Benjamin's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had been blessed with 2 great loves in her life and did not need a third. She spent her final years on the porch of the ranch house, watching the mountains and the prairie and the endless sky, remembering. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm September night in 1930, her family laid her to rest beside Benjamin in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Samuel, now 75 years old himself, spoke at her funeral, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother was the bravest woman I ever knew," he said. "She brought me into this world alone, in the most terrifying circumstances imaginable, and she never gave up. And my father, Benjamin Fletcher, was the kindest man I ever knew. He found us at dawn, 2 strangers who could have been nothing to him, and he made us his family. Together they built something beautiful, a home, a legacy, a love that will inspire generations to come. I am proud to be their son, and I will carry their memory with me until my own last breath. The Fletcher Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each successive generation adding their own chapter to the story. But it all traced back to that September dawn in 1875, when a cowboy named Benjamin Fletcher had found a woman named Elena Edwards holding her newborn son on the open prairie, and had chosen to make them his own. Their love story became legend in the family, told and retold to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and beyond. It was a story of survival and courage, of second chances and new beginnings. It was a story of love that transcended loss, of family built on choice as much as blood. And it was a story that proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that sometimes the end of one chapter is really just the beginning of another. In the end, Elena and Benjamin's legacy was not just the ranch they built, or the children they raised, or even the love they shared. It was the proof that hope endures, that grace can be found in the most unlikely places, and that love, when it is real and true and deep, can heal even the most broken heart. And it all began on a cold September dawn, when a cowboy found a woman holding her baby on the open prairie, and decided to save them both.